Quite often when we're creating materials, we want to get one material looking right and duplicate it, changing the duplicate slightly for other objects in the scene that need to have the same properties but look slightly different. I'll go back into my Environment Materials folder, and I'm going to duplicate one of my materials. I'll click on the wall material and press Ctrl or Command D to duplicate. Now I've got wall material and wall material 1. I'm going to rename this by clicking once, pausing and clicking again, and taking out the 1 and calling it wall material Alt for alternate. Now in this alternate, I'm going to tint that wall slightly. I'll click on the color and just add a little bit more purple into it. What this will let me do is keep both materials and try them out on the different walls in my scene as I'm building, adjusting without losing. Again, it's very common to make one material and get it right, and then duplicate that material and reuse it or apply it on other objects for slight variation throughout a scene. As an alternate, you can choose Edit and Duplicate from the top menu. Creating and modifying materials in the Unity editor is fun and easy. What we need to do is to make sure that the rest of our materials for our Zombie Toys game project are created, modified, and ready to apply. What I'll do is take a look at this directory and compare it to the models. We should see that all of our different models came in with a material, and what we need to do is to select them, maybe pull that model into the scene, and fine-tune the material on it. I'll go into the environment models, for example, and pull the bat in, working my way through that directory. I'll press F to frame and zoom in on it. I'll delete some of the other objects, pressing Command Delete and taking out the top, the fire truck, and the duck. I'll spin around so I can see this in light, and there's the bat. What I'll do on this material then is change that shader, maybe back over to a standard, and then play with the smoothness and metallic properties till it looks correct. Remember that the material we're adjusting is here in the Environment Materials folder, and there's our bat material. Adjusting it here should show us in the scene as well. There it is, very dull and very shiny. I'm going to bring up the smoothness a bit so it's got a bit more shine to it. This is one place where you may want to use a specular shader, just as an example, or create a specular map. What we're seeing here is that this seems to look better with a specular map in it. When we look at that bat specular, we can see it's mostly gray, with one blocked out area for the handle. In our material then, I'm going to leave it as an albedo with a specular, a standard specular setup, so it's got a little bit different shine across it. Again, when making materials, I'll lock my inspector and then deselect in the scene. I'll also turn off the grid so it's as unobstructed as possible, dropping down under Gizmos and turning off Show Grid. With my grid off, I'll take my point light and slide it around in front. When you're making your materials, make sure to have some different lights in to test beyond just the directional. Alternately, you may want to pick that directional light and rotate it around. When we rotate that directional light around in the scene, we can see the lighting change on the object. I'll pull it over and zoom in and check it out in detail. Again, going through each material and adjusting specular, seeing if the specular can work on a value or if it needs an image, seeing if it needs an overall tint, perhaps a little bit more color in the albedo. Right now, to me, this feels a little bit dull. So what I'll do is bring up the value in there. When it's at white, it's not tinting that material at all, and there's the true color showing in the albedo map. I like the way this looks better, although it could use a little bit more yellow. Again, I'll add in a little bit of a warm yellow into that color. I'll back off saturation so it's the tiniest bit of a tint. And now it's really got the look I like. Make sure you go through and create and adjust all the other materials here in your test scene for your Zombie Toys game. I'll do one more as an example. Again, going into the environment and pulling one of my blocks objects in. I'll press F to frame that selection, and right now we can see if we unlock the inspector that it's got a blocks diffuse on it. This is just the color that that blocks model had when it was modeled, perhaps in 3ds Max or Maya, for example. I'll go into my environment materials and start pulling on those different blocks materials. I'll take blocks orange and drag it onto that block in the scene view. I'll open up the material, lock the inspector, and deselect. Zoom in to check it out, and then adjust the color and the smoothness. I'll make it considerably smoother, so it's got a good shine to it. And I'm going to make this orange perhaps a little bit warmer, backing off the hue down to, let's say, 31. This looks good. It's got a nice shine, and we can really see that reflection across it, especially when we're fairly tangent to that surface. I like the smoothness here, and what I'll do is to copy this value. Again, selecting it and pressing Control or Command C, and then switching to the next block, unlocking the inspector, and pasting in that smoothness. Now all of my blocks have that same shine, that very plastic look. Now I'm ready to look at another material. I'll look at the clock glass. In this case, this shader needs to be changed. This shouldn't be a fade, but rather a transparent. What we're seeing here is that it's got an albedo with an alpha for defining our transparency, and I'll pull the clock model in to take a look. I'll frame in by pressing F and orbit around, zooming in to take a look. We can see here that the clock glass is broken. What I'm also going to do is to spin this around into the sun so I can really see that transparency correctly. I'll end up deleting these models out of my test scene, but I'll keep what I've done to the material. Right now, this object shows a fairly opaque material on that broken glass. I'll open up that clock glass and switch over to Standard. I'll click on that color next to the albedo, and what we can see in here is that this has hue saturation value, or red, green, and blue, and an alpha. And in this case, the alpha is down at 54, meaning this is mostly transparent, and it's working correctly. I'm going to make this a little bit more transparent by pulling down the alpha, just about 44 or 45. Then I'll make the glass a little bit brighter, and take a look. It really reads now as glass. It's got a good shine that glimmers across it as we orbit around, and I can definitely see through it that clock face. One more test. I'll take my point light and pull it over next to it, seeing how it looks. If you're having difficulty getting that light in position, go into a top view or into an isometric. I'll click on the viewport label and change from perspective to ISO, and then click on the Y handle up on the viewport axis, scroll out, and place that light. I've placed my light in both top and right views, and I'll click back on that label, changing it from an ISO to a perspective. Then I'll orbit around and press F to frame that selection. Now I can clearly see what light does to that material as I fine-tune it. I'll pull that light up and down, and I can see the shine change across the glass and the clock. Alternately, when you're testing your materials, play with the intensity of a light, making it brighter to see how it reacts in bright light, whether it flares out or still maintains. This is looking pretty good, and I'm ready to move on and adjust the rest of my materials. Go through the Zombie Toys game project, adjusting the materials as you need to really bring the look of that game to life. Remember that most of the objects came in with their materials, but they all need some adjustment to really fine-tune the look of this game.